For most of its history, pizza was the food of the desperate. The poorest workers in one of Europe's poorest cities survived on it. Flat dough, cheap garlic, maybe some lard. Visitors to Naples called it disgusting. Writers described the people who ate it as revolting. Today, the global pizza industry is worth over $150 billion a year. So how did food for people who had almost nothing become food eaten almost everywhere? The answer crosses thousands of years and thousands of miles. It involves a queen, a wave of immigrants, a world war, and a 30-minute delivery guarantee that changed everything. Every time pizza crossed a social boundary, it became something new. Mocked street food became royal cuisine. Immigrant comfort food became American obsession. A corner shop recipe became a global platform worth more than most countries' economies. This is the story of how that happened. Here's something most people don't think about. For thousands of years, pizza was impossible. Not because people hadn't figured out flatbread. They had. Egyptians baked it 6,000 years ago. Greeks covered it with herbs, cheese, and garlic. Romans made their own version, panis focaccius. That's where we get focaccia. Every Mediterranean culture had some version of flatbread with toppings, but none of them could make pizza. The dish we know, the one that conquered the world, couldn't exist yet. The missing ingredient was growing wild on a mountainside, an entire ocean away: the tomato. Tomatoes didn't reach Europe until the 1500s. Spanish explorers brought them from the Americas, along with potatoes, chocolate, and dozens of other crops the Old World had never seen. And when tomatoes arrived, Europeans refused to eat them. You have to understand the fear. Tomatoes belong to the nightshade family. The same family as belladonna, one of the deadliest plants on the continent. Eat the wrong nightshade, and you die. Wealthy Europeans weren't going to take that risk. They grew tomatoes in their gardens as ornamental curiosities. Pretty to look at, potentially fatal to eat. That was the consensus for nearly 200 years. So who finally ate them? The people who couldn't afford to be afraid. In Naples by the late 1700s, the city was a paradox. It was one of the largest cities in Europe. Over 300,000 people crammed into a dense tangle of narrow streets, crumbling buildings, and overcrowded tenements along the bay. It had grand churches and royal palaces. It also had one of the most desperate urban underclasses on the continent. They were called the Lazzaroni. Tens of thousands of day laborers, street workers, dock hands, people surviving hour to hour. They hauled goods at the port, they carried messages, they did whatever work they could find before sunset. They didn't have kitchens, many didn't have permanent homes. They slept in doorways, under market stalls, along the waterfront. They needed food that was cheap, fast, and filling, something you could eat standing up, something you could eat with one hand while you walked to your next job, and they couldn't afford to worry about whether a plant might be poisonous. Hunger is a stronger motivator than fear. Street vendors figured out a solution. Flat dough, baked fast in simple open-air ovens, topped with those tomatoes nobody else would touch. Add garlic, add oil, maybe some cheese if you could get it. Fold it in half, eat it walking, a complete meal for a few coins. It cost almost nothing, and it tasted extraordinary. This was pizza, real pizza, born not from culinary ambition, but from hunger. From necessity, from people who had to make something out of almost nothing, and stumbled onto something incredible. The poorest people in one of Europe's poorest cities had accidentally invented what would become the most popular food on Earth. But they didn't know that yet. Nobody did, because the upper classes wanted nothing to do with it. Italian author Carlo Collodi, the man who created Pinocchio, described pizza in 1886 as a complicated piece of work that is soiled and is sold in dirty establishments. European travelers who visited Naples wrote about pizza with open contempt. It was poor people food, peasant food, street food, nothing respectable. But there's a pattern in food history that repeats itself over and over. The dishes that begin at the bottom, the ones the wealthy mock and the respectable ignore, are often the ones that endure. Bread started as peasant fuel. Pasta was working-class sustenance. Rice fed laborers. Potatoes were animal feed before they were human food. Pizza was about to prove that pattern in the most dramatic way imaginable, because the food that respectable people wouldn't touch was about to be served to a queen. And the story of how that happened, it might not even be true. How did food associated with poverty reach the royal palace? By the early 1800s, pizza had already started climbing, slowly. Naples had actual pizzerias, not restaurants in the modern sense. These were open-air stalls with simple brick ovens and a wooden counter. Workers grabbed a slice and kept moving, but they were real businesses with real locations, serving real customers. One of the oldest, Antica Pizzeria Port Alba, reportedly opened around 1830. It still operates today. Nearly 2 centuries of continuous pizza making in the same neighborhood. And by the mid-1800s, 2 classic combinations had emerged that would define pizza forever. The marinara, tomato, garlic, oregano, and olive oil. Named not for seafood, but because fishermen's wives made it for their husbands returning from the Bay of Naples. A simple pizza for working people, made by working people, and the combination of tomato, mozzarella, and basil, which would eventually become the most famous pizza in the world. Now here's the story you've probably heard. In 1889, King Umberto and Queen Margherita of Savoy visited Naples. According to tradition, the queen grew tired of the elaborate French cuisine served at royal events. She wanted to try the local food she'd heard about. A pizzaiolo named Raffaele Esposito from Pizzeria Brandi was summoned to the royal palace to make pizza for the queen. He prepared 3 varieties. The queen reportedly loved the one with tomato, mozzarella, and basil, the red, white, and green of the Italian flag. Esposito named it Pizza Margherita in her honor. The world's most famous pizza, born from a royal endorsement. A queen's approval transforming street food into something legitimate. It's a perfect story. It's also heavily debated. Food historian Zachary Nowak and others have spent years digging into the evidence. The original thank you letter, supposedly signed by a member of the Queen's household, shows signs that it may have been fabricated. The handwriting doesn't match other royal correspondence. Pizzas with tomato, mozzarella, and basil existed long before 1889. That combination wasn't new. And the royal household's own records contain no independent mention of this visit. Does that mean the story is entirely invented? Not necessarily. Something likely happened. A royal visit to a pizzeria in 1889 isn't implausible, but the neat narrative, Queen tastes pizza, falls in love, names it, pizza becomes respectable overnight, that's almost certainly a simplification. A legend built on a kernel of truth. But here's what matters more than whether the story is real. Someone felt the need to invent it. Someone thought pizza needed royal permission to be legitimate. That tells you exactly how low pizza's social status was. Even in Naples, even in the city that created it. Pizza carried a stigma so deep that its champions felt they had to fabricate a royal endorsement just to earn basic respect. And that stigma extended well beyond Naples. This is something most people don't realize about Italian food. Italy wasn't a unified country until 1861. Before that, it was a patchwork of separate states, each with its own cuisine, dialect, and identity. The North and the South were practically different countries, and Northern Italians, wealthier, more industrialized, more connected to the rest of Europe, looked at the South with something between pity and contempt. Rome didn't develop significant pizza culture until the 20th century. Milan had almost none. Florence ignored it. Northern Italians dismissed pizza as peasant food from the backward, impoverished South, which, in their minds, meant it wasn't really Italian food at all. It was Neapolitan food, regional, low-class, irrelevant. For decades, pizza's world remained remarkably small. A single city, a few dozen pizzerias, a working-class tradition that the rest of its own country either ignored or actively looked down on. So how did pizza escape? Here's the irony. Pizza didn't conquer Italy first. It couldn't. The people who loved pizza most had to leave Italy entirely, and they were already leaving in massive numbers. Between 1880 and 1920, over 4 million Italians emigrated to the United States. A huge proportion came from southern Italy, from Naples and the surrounding Campania region. They were leaving poverty, limited farmland, scarce jobs, and a country whose northern establishment had little use for them. Most of them would never go back. They packed whatever they could carry onto crowded ships. They crossed the Atlantic in steerage. The cheapest, lowest, most cramped section of the vessel. Weeks at sea. Strange food. A language they didn't speak waiting for them on the other side. They couldn't pack pizza. You can't carry a wood-fired oven across an ocean. But they carried something more durable. The knowledge. The recipes. The muscle memory of how dough should feel between your fingers. The understanding of how hot the oven needs to be, and the memory of how it tasted. On a hot afternoon in Naples when you were hungry and had almost no money and someone handed you a folded piece of dough with tomato and cheese. Food is the last thing immigrants give up. It's the strongest thread connecting the new life to the old one. And when those 4 million Italians reached the other side of the Atlantic, many of them did the same thing. They recreated the food that reminded them of home. What nobody could have predicted was what America would do to pizza in return. In New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, and a dozen other American cities, Italian immigrants rebuilt their food culture from scratch. Pizza was central to it. A taste of home, a thread connecting the new world to the old one. But pizza stayed inside the neighborhood. If you weren't Italian, you'd probably never tasted it. If you weren't from southern Italy, you might not have even heard of it. Walk 10 blocks outside of Little Italy in Manhattan, and pizza didn't exist. It lived in a bubble, intensely familiar to a small community, completely invisible to everyone else. The first licensed pizzeria in America is generally credited to Gennaro Lombardi. Around 1905, he started selling pizza at 5312 Spring Street in Manhattan's Little Italy. Whether it was truly the first is debated. Italian families had been making and selling pizza from their homes and shops for years before Lombardi got his license. But it marks the moment pizza entered the official American record as a business. Lombardi's drew steady crowds from the Italian community. Other pizzerias opened in Italian neighborhoods across the Northeast. But for decades, that's roughly where pizza stayed. Ethnic food. A regional specialty known only to those who grew up with it. A small, loyal audience that loved it fiercely and couldn't understand why the rest of America hadn't discovered it yet. Most of America had no idea what they were missing. Then Americans started doing something to pizza that would have baffled anyone in Naples. They changed it. Radically. In 1943, Ike Sewell and Rick Ricardo opened Pizzeria Uno on the corner of Ohio and Wabash in Chicago. What they served looked nothing like Neapolitan pizza. Nothing at all. Deep dish, a thick buttery crust pressed into a deep pan, cheese layered on the bottom. Not the top. Chunky tomato sauce poured over everything, loaded with Italian sausage, baked until the edges were golden and the interior was molten. It was closer to a savory pie than anything that had ever come out of a Naples oven. Neapolitans would have been horrified. Chicagoans couldn't get enough. New York went the opposite direction entirely. Large, foldable slices with a thin, crispy crust. Designed for a city where nobody sits still. You fold the slice lengthwise, angle it slightly so the oil runs toward the point, and eat it while walking down the sidewalk. No plate, no fork. No slowing down. The New York slice wasn't just pizza. It was pizza engineered for New York's pace of life. And in New Haven, Connecticut, Frank Pepe's had been serving a pizza since 1925. Charred, blistered, served on a thin cracker-like crust, often topped with fresh clams. Nothing like Naples. Nothing like Chicago. Nothing like New York. Every American city that touched pizza left a fingerprint on it. Detroit would eventually develop a rectangular, thick-crusted style baked in blue steel pans that came straight from the auto factories. St. Louis invented a cracker-thin crust with Provel, a processed cheese blend that exists nowhere else on Earth. And here's what's remarkable. Nobody was coordinating any of this. There was no pizza authority, no rule book, no certification board. No one saying, this is how pizza must be. Italian immigrants brought a template, and Americans improvised on it in a dozen directions simultaneously. But why? Why did Americans transform pizza more radically than Italians ever had? Part of it was cultural. Mid-century America was a country obsessed with reinvention, with taking something and making it bigger, bolder, more. Part of it was geographic. Different cities had different ovens, different local ingredients, different customer expectations. But the biggest reason was simpler and more interesting. Most Americans eating pizza had never tasted the original. They had zero reference point. No tradition to protect, no old country memories to honor, no Neapolitan grandmother telling them they were doing it wrong. They weren't breaking rules. They genuinely didn't know the rules existed. Pizza arrived in their world as a blank slate, and they treated it like one. That freedom, that total absence of reverence, is what produced the incredible diversity of American pizza. It's also what would eventually horrify Italian purists. But pizza was still mostly a regional, ethnic food. The average American in Kansas or Georgia or Oregon had probably never tried it. Pizza hadn't gone mainstream. Not yet. That required a catastrophe on the other side of the world. World War II changed everything for pizza, and it happened almost by accident. Between 1943 and 1945, hundreds of thousands of American GIs were stationed across Italy, fighting their way up the peninsula from Sicily to Rome and beyond. They ate what was available. In Naples, in small towns throughout the South, in villages where the fighting had moved through and left rubble behind, that often meant pizza. Simple, cheap, local pizza from whatever bakery or street vendor was still operating. For many of these soldiers, farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Michigan, kids from Texas who'd never met an Italian person in their lives, it was their very first slice. And they remembered it. Not just the taste, the entire experience. Picture it. You're 20 years old, you're exhausted, you're scared. You're sitting in a bombed-out Italian piazza with the rest of your unit, and someone hands you a piece of flatbread covered in tomato and melted cheese. It's hot, it's simple, and for a few minutes, eating it, the war fades into the background. Pizza became tangled up with memory. Not food memory. Life memory. Youth, survival, friendship, the strange intensity of wartime, where everything tastes better because you're not sure you'll be alive to eat tomorrow. For hundreds of thousands of young Americans, pizza was woven into the most formative experience of their lives. When those soldiers came home, they didn't just remember pizza. They craved it. They talked about it constantly. They dragged their wives and girlfriends to Italian neighborhoods to try it. They told their kids about this incredible food they'd discovered overseas, and the timing was extraordinary. Millions of young men returned simultaneously to a booming post-war economy. They had steady jobs, good money, new suburban houses with modern kitchens. They were building families, building communities, and they had this persistent, nostalgic craving for a food most of their neighbors had never even heard of. Demand exploded. Pizzerias began opening outside Italian neighborhoods for the first time in American history. Through the 1950s, pizza restaurants popped up in suburbs across the country, places where a decade earlier you couldn't have found pizza within 100 miles. But something even bigger was about to happen. Pizza was about to escape the pizzeria entirely. In 1957, the Celentano brothers reportedly introduced one of the first commercially available frozen pizzas. The crust was mediocre. The toppings were basic. The cheese had a texture that no Italian would recognize. The whole thing tasted like a pale, cardboard-adjacent imitation of real pizza. None of that mattered, not even a little. What mattered was the breakthrough underneath the bad crust. For the first time in pizza's entire history, you didn't need a pizzaiolo. You didn't need to live near an Italian neighborhood. You didn't need to know a single person who knew how to make pizza. You didn't even need to leave your house. A freezer and a home oven. That was the entire barrier to entry. 20 minutes at 425 degrees, and dinner was ready. And it was happening at exactly the right moment. The late 1950s were the golden age of American convenience food. TV dinners, canned soup, instant coffee, frozen vegetables. The country was building a new relationship with food, one that prioritized speed, ease, and accessibility over craft. Frozen pizza fit perfectly into that cultural shift. Think about what happened in sequence. First, soldiers made Americans want pizza. Then frozen food removed the last obstacle. You no longer needed someone who knew how to make it. Desire, then access, in that order. That's the formula for explosive growth in any industry, and pizza had both simultaneously. The 1950s were the decade that changed everything. Pizza went from ethnic curiosity to American fixture with a speed that's hard to overstate. Pizzerias opened in strip malls and on main streets in towns that had never seen one. Frozen pizzas appeared in supermarkets from coast to coast. Pizza became a Friday night ritual, a birthday party staple, a little league celebration, a late night college meal, a first date, a last resort when nobody wanted to cook. By the end of the decade, pizza had pulled off something almost unprecedented in food history. In roughly 10 years, it leapt from an ethnic niche to an American staple. From something most Americans had never tasted to something most Americans ate regularly. From a food with zero mainstream recognition to a food that was so ubiquitous, it felt like it had always been there. The speed of that transformation is staggering. No marketing campaign drove it. No celebrity endorsed it. No government program promoted it. Pizza conquered America through pure organic demand. One slice, one customer, one craving at a time. And the transformation still wasn't over, because up to this point, pizza was a food. Someone made it. You ate it. That was the entire business model. 3 entrepreneurs were about to change that completely. They were going to turn pizza into a machine, a franchise system, a delivery network, a logistics operation that could replicate itself in any zip code in the country. 2 of them were college kids with almost no money. And one of them would make a trade so bad it became a legend. What single promise transformed pizza delivery forever? We'll get there. First, the foundations. In 1958, 2 brothers named Frank and Dan Carney were students at Wichita State University in Kansas. A family friend suggested they open a pizza restaurant. Pizza was taking off in the Northeast, but Wichita barely knew what it was. The brothers borrowed $600 from their mother. They rented a small building on a busy corner. The building was so tiny, the sign only had room for 8 characters. Pizza Hut fit. That was the extent of the branding strategy. The pizza was decent, nothing revolutionary. But the business model was brilliant. The Carney brothers understood something that most independent pizzeria owners didn't think about: consistency and scalability. Same menu everywhere, same recipes. Same experience whether you walked into a Pizza Hut in Kansas or Kentucky or California. Within a year, they'd started franchising. Within a decade, Pizza Hut was the largest pizza chain in America. By the 1970s, they'd crossed international borders and were selling pizza in countries where most people had never heard the word. A year after Pizza Hut launched, Mike and Marion Ellich opened the first Little Caesars in a strip mall in Garden City, Michigan, just outside Detroit. Their angle was different. Pure value. Low prices. Fast service. Eventually defined by the hot and ready concept. $5 pizzas, already made, sitting under a heat lamp, ready the moment you walked in. Both chains grew fast, but neither of them changed the game the way the next one did. In 1960, a 23-year-old college student named Tom Monaghan and his brother James scraped together enough cash to buy a small, struggling pizza shop called Domino's in Ypsilanti, Michigan. The shop was barely surviving, the neighborhood wasn't great, the equipment was old, but Tom saw potential. They split ownership 50-50. Running a pizza shop turned out to be harder than either brother expected. Long hours, razor-thin margins, the smell of dough and sauce soaking into your clothes every night. James got tired of it quickly. About 8 months in, he made a decision that would become one of the most famous bad trades in business history. He sold his half of the business to Tom. The price? A used Volkswagen Beetle. That Beetle was worth roughly $500. Tom Monaghan's half of Domino's would eventually become Domino's Pizza, a company now valued at over $14 billion. James Monaghan got a car. Tom Monaghan got an empire. Tom renamed the shop. He struggled for years. The business nearly went bankrupt more than once. A fire destroyed the original store. Debts piled up. Most people would have walked away. But Tom Monaghan had one idea, one obsession, that nobody else in the pizza industry was willing to bet everything on. Delivery. Not as a side service, not as a convenience, as the entire identity of the company. Other pizza places delivered. But for them, delivery was an afterthought, something they offered because customers asked for it. Domino's flipped that. Delivery was the product. The pizza was almost secondary. What you were really buying was the promise that hot food would arrive at your door, fast. In the early 1980s, Domino's turned that promise into a guarantee. 30 minutes or it's free. It was revolutionary. And it was reckless. The guarantee created a frenzy. Drivers raced through residential neighborhoods. Customers set timers the moment they hung up the phone. Pizza delivery became a performance, part food service, part race against the clock. Domino's drivers became infamous for speeding, running stop signs, cutting through parking lots. The lawsuits started piling up. Accidents, injuries. In 1993, a jury in St. Louis awarded $78 million to a woman struck by a Domino's delivery driver. The company dropped the guarantee shortly after. But here's the thing, by 1993, it didn't matter. The guarantee had already rewired American culture, not just the pizza industry. Think about what Domino's actually did. They didn't just deliver pizza faster, they changed the relationship between Americans and their food. Before Domino's, eating out meant going out. You got dressed, you drove somewhere, you sat down. The restaurant was the experience. Domino's flipped that completely. The experience was staying home. The pizza came to you. Your couch was the restaurant. Your TV was the ambiance. Your doorbell was the dinner bell. That sounds small. It wasn't. Domino's helped invent the modern expectation that food should come to you, not the other way around. Every food delivery app on your phone today, every DoorDash driver and Uber Eats notification exists in a world that Domino's helped build. That world started with a 30-minute guarantee and a college kid in Ypsilanti, Michigan, who bet everything on speed. By the 1990s, a handful of massive chains controlled the American pizza market. Pizza Hut, Domino's, Little Caesars. Papa John's, which John Schnatter had launched in 1984 out of a converted broom closet in his father's tavern in Jeffersonville, Indiana. Together, they generated billions in revenue and served millions of customers every single day. The chains had made pizza accessible, affordable, available in places that had never seen a pizzeria. A kid growing up in rural Oklahoma could eat pizza twice a week. A family in suburban Phoenix could have it delivered on a Tuesday night without thinking twice. The chains democratized pizza in a way nobody in Naples could have imagined. But they'd also standardized it, homogenized it. Every local pizzeria that closed because it couldn't compete with chain prices took something irreplaceable with it. A recipe, a technique, a personality. The regional character, the local craft, the feeling that this pizza came from this person in this place, all of that got flattened into a consistent, predictable, interchangeable product. A Domino's in Texas tasted identical to a Domino's in Maine. That was the entire point. That was the business model. And it worked brilliantly. But for millions of Americans, that consistency was pizza. It was the only pizza they knew. They'd never tasted anything else. They didn't know pizza had once been something you could only get from a specific person, in a specific neighborhood, made by hand in a wood-fired oven by someone who'd learned the craft from their parents. Pizza had conquered America. It had crossed every social boundary, from immigrant food to suburban staple to corporate product. The question nobody was asking yet was whether pizza could survive its own success. Could it conquer the world without losing what made it worth eating in the first place? The answer turned out to be stranger than anyone expected. Pizza didn't just globalize, it mutated, and the mutation started sensible. Then they got creative. Then they got genuinely wild. In India, Domino's adapted carefully. They studied the market. They realized that standard American pizza, heavy on pepperoni and sausage, wouldn't work in a country where a huge percentage of the population is vegetarian and most of the rest doesn't eat beef or pork. So they rebuilt the menu from scratch. Paneer tikka pizza, tandoori chicken pizza, entirely vegetarian options with spice levels calibrated for Indian palates. They didn't just translate pizza into Indian, they reimagined it. And Domino's India became one of the most successful international pizza operations on the planet. That was smart localization. Respectful. Logical. Almost restrained. Then Brazil took things much further. São Paulo developed one of the densest pizza cultures outside of Italy. Thousands of pizzerias crammed into a single sprawling city. Brazilian pizza piled on catupiry, a creamy processed cheese that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Toppings Americans would never dream of. Hearts of palm, green peas, hard-boiled eggs. And at the end of a meal, some pizzerias served dessert pizza. topped with chocolate, strawberries, and sweetened condensed milk. Not chocolate cake served alongside pizza. Pizza that was dessert, on dough from the pizza oven. Then Japan threw out the rulebook entirely. Mayonnaise as a base sauce, corn as a topping, squid, teriyaki chicken, seaweed. One major chain offered a crust stuffed with tiny hot dogs. Another created a pizza shaped like a star. Japanese pizza culture didn't adapt tradition. It abandoned tradition completely and treated pizza as a creative playground with no fences. And then Sweden put banana and curry powder on pizza, and people ordered it again and again. Each adaptation outraged purists, and each one proved the same point. Few dishes in human history tolerate reinvention as easily as pizza does, and the reason is structural. Think about what pizza actually is. Flatbread, the simplest, oldest form of bread. A sauce, which can be anything. Cheese, or not. Toppings, whatever your culture eats, whatever your market sells, whatever you have in your kitchen tonight. That's the formula. 4 variables, each infinitely adjustable. And the formula works with virtually any cuisine on Earth. You can localize it endlessly, make it cheap or luxurious, fast or artisanal, conservative or completely unhinged. The platform doesn't break. You can put squid on it. You can put chocolate on it. You can stuff the crust with hot dogs. And it's still recognizably pizza. Pizza isn't a recipe, it's a framework. And that framework, that adaptability, that openness to reinvention, is the reason pizza succeeded on a scale that almost no other food in history has matched. And just as pizza was reaching every corner of the world, morphing into forms that would make a Neapolitan pizzaiolo weep, Italy did something remarkable. It asked the world to remember where pizza came from. In 2017, UNESCO added the art of Neapolitan pizza making, l'arte del pizzaiolo napoletano, to its list of intangible cultural heritage. Not pizza itself, not the recipe, the craft, the hand kneading, the wood-fired oven. The specific techniques passed from master to apprentice in the same narrow streets where the Lazzaroni once folded cheap flatbread and ate it while they walked to their next job. Think about that for a second. Really sit with it. Remember the Lazzaroni. Day laborers, no kitchens, no homes, sleeping in doorways along the Naples waterfront, surviving on food that wealthy Italians called disgusting, food that European tourists mocked in their travel journals, food that even Neapolitan intellectuals, people who lived in the same city, were embarrassed by. Food so far down the social ladder that someone felt the need to fabricate a royal endorsement just to make it respectable. Their food is now a protected cultural treasure of humanity, listed alongside traditions like Chinese calligraphy, Argentine tango, and Japanese no theater. That is not just a culinary reversal. That's one of the most dramatic status transformations in the entire history of food. From the absolute bottom of the social ladder, from contempt and mockery and embarrassment, to global recognition, cultural protection, and universal love. From mud ovens in Egypt, through the desperate streets of Naples, past Ellis Island, into a GI's mess kit in wartime Italy, through a $600 loan from a mother in Wichita, across every border, every ocean, every culture on the planet. Pizza didn't just survive history, it absorbed it. Every era, every migration, every economic shift, every social boundary. Pizza adapted. Pizza endured. Pizza crossed over to the other side. After conquering the world, did pizza lose what made it special? That's the question the last decade has been answering. And the answer is no. But not for the reason you'd expect. Two opposing forces now pull pizza in completely different directions, and both are winning. On one side, technology has pushed convenience beyond anything the Domino's drivers of the 1980s could have imagined. You can order pizza from your phone, track it in real time from oven to doorstep, and have it delivered by someone you'll never meet, from a ghost kitchen that doesn't even have a dining room. Domino's now generates more than half its global sales through digital channels alone. On the other side, there's been an artisan renaissance. A global movement of pizzaioli who've gone back to the source. They've traveled to Naples, they've trained under masters, They've imported wood-fired ovens and spent weeks learning to control the temperature by sound and smell. Neapolitan-style pizzerias have exploded across the world. Portland, London, Tokyo, Melbourne, Sao Paulo. 72-hour fermented dough. San Marzano tomatoes imported from the volcanic slopes of Vesuvius. Fresh mozzarella di bufala made from water buffalo milk. Certified pizzaioli following the exact same techniques their predecessors used 2 centuries ago in the exact same narrow streets. And here's the part that makes pizza unlike any other food on the planet. Both extremes coexist. Both thrive. Neither one is killing the other. You can spend $2 on a gas station slice wrapped in cellophane, or $30 on a margarita made by a certified pizzaiolo using flour milled from ancient Italian grain varieties. Both are pizza. Both have their audience. Both are completely valid. The Lazzaroni would barely recognize a deep dish pizza from Chicago. Raffaele Esposito would be baffled by a Japanese mayonnaise corn pizza. Gennaro Lombardi would be stunned to learn his Little Spring Street shop was the spark that lit a $150 billion global fire. But they'd all recognize the foundation. Dough. Heat. Whatever you've got on hand for toppings. That's all it's ever been. A poor person's solution to hunger that turned out to be everyone's answer to the simplest question in the world. What should we eat tonight? 6,000 years of flatbread, 300 years of tomatoes, one city that invented it, one country that reinvented it, an entire planet that claimed it as their own. That's the history of pizza. If you want another story like this, how coffee went from an obscure Ethiopian berry to the world's second most traded commodity, it's right here. Subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one.